This is a really interesting hadith, and I often tell people this, that the Prophet ﷺ's ahadith, or his advices, were never taken as being mean-spirited to people. You know, when there's a trust level, you take more frank advice from someone because you trust where the advice is coming from. That's actually something, I was having this discussion with a pastor recently. He was talking about, like, sometimes how the YouTube clips come out of a pastor speaking to his congregation, and they look worse than they actually are. And sometimes they're just really bad, like any Trump-supporting pastor. All right, there's no way to really contextualize these things, like a Robert Jeffress type. But, you know, sometimes there's a frank conversation or a fun conversation that's being had, a pastor talking to a youth group or talking to a congregation, and there's a level of trust and cohesion, chemistry that's been built between a congregation and the pastor. So it's taken as fatherly, loving advice, the same way that you find from Abu Bakr and Umar. When Abu Bakr grabs Umar by the beard, right, it's not taken as offensive to Umar because there's a certain trust level. They're brothers. So when there's that chemistry and that trust, advice can be given with more frankness. Agree or disagree? All right. So when the Prophet ﷺ spoke to women about their obligations, when he spoke to men about their obligations, it was never taken as mean-spirited. Women did not say to the Prophet ﷺ, "You're being too difficult with us." But they trusted him, which is why they went to him and they asked him for a specific day of the week where he could sit just with them and cater to their concerns. So the Prophet ﷺ's presence was not overbearing. If anything, there was a comfort level. So a lot of times when you have a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ is speaking to women, you know how they write the books now? For women only, for men only, like don't read this and don't read that, because at the end of the day you should be focused on your obligations. They were not said in any mean spirit, but it gets lost in the text sometimes. So this hadith is an interesting one. Asma bint Yazid al-Ansariya. Al-Ansariya radiyallahu anha. Read about Asma bint Yazid. This was a woman that was the khatiba. She was the one who spoke on behalf of the women. What does that mean? She spoke on behalf of the women. She was known for having a particularly challenging attitude. And I don't say that in a negative way. She had a strong personality, and she would openly speak on behalf. She would sometimes speak to the concerns of sisters that were not being spoken to. So there's a famous narration where she came to the Prophet ﷺ in the presence of the men, and she said to the Prophet ﷺ, "Ya Rasulullah, how is it that we the women do this and we do that and we do that, but then the men go out in Salatul Jama'ah, the men go out and battle with you, and they're taking all the reward. Don't we get some of the reward too?" And the Prophet ﷺ looks to the men. She said this in front of the men. And he said, "Have you ever heard a speech more beautiful than this woman's speech?" And the Sahaba said, "Ya Rasulullah, we don't know that you taught in this way." Meaning, like they were. I mean, she was being very forward and frank, right? And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Go back to the women and tell them that for them is the same reward as the men." Okay.